is that okay, if I bring that matter up with the staff, is that okay if she says go ahead? I just want to get out of your way because time is of the essence, and in the midst of all these other things, you need to start, I think it is going to ultimately be a procurement process, you know.
We need to also begin discussions with the county commissioners in terms of.
Jack. Okay, good. Thank you for bringing that up, Sandy. Anything else? Was there another item you want?
I'll bring up the crossover.
Okay.
Well, I'm concerned about the crossover that occurred and what's been reported in the press. And my at least the anecdotal sense is that some people that it would appear in violation of the law. And then the question, I mean, that's all I would say not sufficiently documented from my perspective because it's only in news reports, but it seems to me, and I really kind of look to legal counsel on this, that we have some obligation to pursue matters where people violated the state law in the context of an election that we were running as to particular individuals. And then I'm not really clear. You know, Rob, you had been on this talk show, and this guy, was he kind of doing the Limbaugh thing of telling people they should cross over?
Hey, this was Bob France on WTAM, who was, I would say, acting more responsibly than it appeared Limbaugh was. He was not actively encouraging it. He was talking about it, engendering discussion because it let me come on air to encourage people not to do that. Okay. Please come out and vote, and vote however you genuinely wish, but don't intentionally go into another party primary with that type of intent. So I felt he was acting more responsibly. I think he probably, you wanted to go on air with him or something to continue to spread that message. I also thought that the plain dealer, in my opinion, hit it right on the head in terms of looking prospectively. That I think that the legislature should look at either a closed primary and open primary, but not putting that burden on our poll workers the way it is now. Either have at the time voter registration closes, that that's also the time to declare which primary you're voting in, or just have a truly open primary. Both systems have validity, but this type of system where it really is a judgment call on our poll workers, because in this system, and then we have some time before the next partisan primary, although there will be some local partisan primaries potentially in a municipal year next year. We do have some time to work on this, but if the law remains the way it is, to my mind, it really is a poll worker training issue, so we don't end up with unequal application of the law across our jurisdiction. We can't do much to say about what happens in other counties, but we certainly need to have our poll workers trained as well as possible on this crossover issue and what their obligations are, looking at voter history, in addition to the other things they have to look at.
Well, I agree. I mean, personally, I think it's a bad law, and the law should be changed, but it's the law that we're operating under now. I somewhat disagree with, if you're referring to the Plain Dealers editorial, I think they use the word lack of sincerity or something. I think that just, in my own view, trivializes what I think some people did in terms of the law. So I think it's a matter that we need to pursue. So that we have, I guess, we have quasi-judicial authority to subpoena people to bring them in to ask them, and that's what it's kind of where I see us going on this. So that's what I wanted to get a sense of the board on that issue.
Who would you propose to bring in?
Well, there's people that were referenced in the newspaper. I guess I would subpoena those people. There's anecdotal stories that people put on their provisional ballots one day only. I want to know what kind of burden that puts us under to go through those, and if there's any similar comments, I'd bring those people in.
The reference was on the form, the affidavit they have to sign on provisional, is that?
I don't know where it was, I don't know if they were on a ballot or TSI or 10X form or.
I just want to echo Sandy's concern about this issue, and, you know, I do think we are stuck with the law. I mean, the law is the law currently, and that's what we're obligated to operate under, and I do think to the extent, you know, there's stuff that's already been flagged in the plain dealer, to the extent that we are under a duty to investigate this kind of thing, we're not supposed to permit folks to violate the law and commit voter fraud. I think we do have an affirmative duty to look into it. I'm not exactly sure how, and I would need some more advice from legal counsel. I'm not sure how we discern the sincerity piece. I mean, bringing the folks in to inquire of them is one thing. I guess I'm not exactly sure how we drill down on there. I mean, some cases may be obvious, but some may be a little bit harder to discern what people's intent actually may have been. But I do think we have a duty to look into it and to bring people in. I actually shared with you guys, a concern that I had on the poll worker training issue. This is, it was reported anecdotally that 2 poll workers in a particular location were actually soliciting and encouraging voters to cross over, saying, oh, we did it too, and then never to follow up with the appropriate declaration or paperwork that's supposed to accompany that kind of change. And I have I don't know if those were our poll workers. It was apparently in a borderline community where it could have been another county. But I definitely feel that, we cannot have poll workers behaving in that manner. We should absolutely, if you guys haven't already done it, I have a feeling you might have already looked into that particular issue. But that is really, to me, inappropriate conduct on behalf of poll workers, and I think we need to have a duty to look into that issue as well. I generally am very supportive of your concerns, Sandy, on this crossover voter issue, and I do think we should, take some steps to look into it. I mean, logistically, I think we have to figure out at some point, and I don't know how we do this, which case, we could start with the folks that, with those, items that were identified perhaps in the newspaper and flagged in that way, or those voting locations where there seem to be inordinate numbers of folks crossing over. I do have a current concern on logistically how we would, how we would do it, or how would we make a determination of sincerity or wrongdoing. But I'm happy to undergo and undertake the exercise, because I think it's important enough to do so.
What obligation do we have as a board to ensure that the training was sufficient, that we adequately explained to these poll workers? It's a 3-hour lesson, it's a 140-page book, and said, you know what, here's on page, and I know there's a page about that. If you don't comply with this, if you don't follow this, you may become the subject of a criminal investigation. And to what extent did our poll worker trainers tell our people that?
I'm certain that they didn't use that language.
Right? Or that they even touched on it
Yeah.
necessarily.
I
I can tell you, I attended the poll worker training, not this last time with this new system, but the other one, it was never touched on about crossover voters or anything else. I am very hesitant to bring this board into a posture where we're actually looking into matters because we read something in the paper with a criminal tone to it. We've seen what that's happened in the last 3 years and just most recently. And all of a sudden to take that posture again is going to send a very, very chilling effect, I think, to our poll worker recruitment. Is there a problem? Absolutely. Is this something we have a responsibility to address? Absolutely. Is our response more focused on training and telling people not again, and if it happens, this is what will happen? Or is this just unilaterally say, aha, we've been encouraged by some national talk show hosts, we've got you quoted in the paper, some 70-year-old people, because I think that's what they are. And we've got you, and you're coming in and you're meeting with us. And possibly you better bring an attorney, because we're going to refer you criminally to the prosecutor's office. And we know what that office will do. They'll do their duty. They'll do their duty. And I'm very hesitant to just, you know, to go down that road. I appreciate your positions, but, you know, you just start down this road, you open up a tremendous Pandora's box, and this becomes a story that's going to have its own legs and be reported statewide, nationally, about what we're doing here. And we better think this through before we do it. And how we're going to do it procedurally, as you point out, Joe. Are we going to just summarily ask our staff to look in the newspaper and get the radio channels, and, you know, go to listen to tapes of channels and say, aha, here's a name, this is who we're going to go after?
Well, I'm not interested personally in going out and trying to find people, as you suggest, in terms of listening to newscasts. But you know, when it comes to my attention in the normal course of reading the newspaper, I don't think it's something that I can ignore. I certainly didn't go out and look at every newspaper I possibly could to see if there was some other name that was out there. But in the ordinary course, these facts were presented, and I find them troubling. I don't really think, I wouldn't put it on poll workers. I think people, we don't have, I think, an affirmative obligation to tell every citizen what all of the statutory rights and wrongs are. It's not a defense normally to say in a criminal context, I didn't know engaging in X activity wasn't criminal, and therefore the judge then says, oh, you didn't know, well, then you're excused. That's generally not how our jurisprudence works. So I think it is a matter that does need to be pursued. I guess the first thought in my own mind, and I don't think this is a very widespread problem. I think it's few and far between, is my sense. And I guess the first thing I would like to know is, in reviewing the documents that we have in this office, what evidence do we have that in fact it may have occurred? And then looking at that evidence, figuring out what we should or should not do as a board.
And we checked with what other board, I mean, this is not unique to Cuyahoga County either. It happened throughout the state of Ohio, as it was reported to me. And I guess I'd like to hear from the Secretary of State's office what their suggestion would be in regard to this and what they're suggesting other counties do in that regard before we proceed to. I agree with you.
I'm happy to do that.
It's not something that you can ignore. I really am loath to get criminal involvement here versus someone being talked to about this, but this is a matter that needs to be addressed internally, how we're going to train our poll workers. And until I get to that criminal element of it, I want to know these other things first.
So as a plan of action, then can we agree to have our folks talk to the Secretary of State, get some idea about how other boards have addressed this issue, and have our own staff look at the documents we have to determine how many instances that this may have occurred?
I would agree, and I think there are different levels of it too. If it's been reported anecdotally in the paper that there were poll workers actively saying switch, that to me is a little different than, you know, Mrs. Smith coming up and signing for one day only. You know, we need to make a distinction here too about, you know, how deep are we going to drill on this thing and get to this, what I think is frankly a very poor system, determining someone's sincerity. And also there's constitutionality of the equal protection argument as far as I'm concerned too. An independent can ask for whatever ballot they want. If you happen to be a D or an R, you're treated differently and taking a loyalty oath. So yes, I agree with both I and Joe and Sandy that it isn't something you can ignore certainly. But the approach would be, yes, talking to the Secretary's office, maybe asking staff to look into it and finding where they've had actual people write to them, calls made to them, et cetera, complaints in that regard, and they kind of take a look into it, who they were, and find out what they can actually happen.
Yeah, I want to just clarify, I mean, I'm not interested in throwing people under the bus, and I'm certainly not interested in having a chilling effect or creating a problem for us where it makes it even more difficult to recruit poll workers. But by the same token, I've had 5 people in my own office come and ask me, based on their own reading of the paper, how can you allow 2 poll workers to be directing this kind of, you know, activity? And so I do think there may be different, you know, issues. You know, I do think we have a direct responsibility and maybe an easier responsibility in terms of correcting or looking into the issues that impact our own poll workers, as opposed to, going to, call in voters to try to figure out what their intent was on that day. But I do think there is some basic inquiry that we need to be making in connection with our responsibility. One, to make sure our poll workers are doing the right thing. I am personally appalled that we could have poll workers, and I don't care what age they are, directing and soliciting and inviting people to potentially break the law. And I think we absolutely have a duty to figure out, and I'm not saying we immediately necessarily refer them to the prosecutor's office, but I think we have a duty to make sure our poll worker department is addressing them and pointing out to them that, hey, you're not supposed to be doing that. You can't do that. So I do think that there's some basic inquiry that we need to make, and I think we will have to get some guidance about, I don't know how we determine that intent. I would struggle with that personally, but I do think we need to make the effort, because this is a very serious thing, and I do like the idea also of checking with the Secretary of State's office and getting some guidance on it.
I'll give you an example, and I know Rob, you have a comment. I was at the courthouse today, and a woman came up to me and said, and she was a Democrat, this woman approached me and said, my sister, my good friend went to vote and asked for a Republican ballot. And she said the Democratic precinct person at the poll worker chastised her for 5 minutes and said, you can't. No, I mean, I don't know that it happened, that's what she told me, but obviously that's a breach of the law. And do I, now that she said this to me, all of a sudden have a complete investigation on this matter, then undoubtedly this stuff happens. And to what extent do you say, it's okay to go in this direction, but not this one? And that's what my concern is when we're doing this. Now, we've done it before with voters who voted twice. And we had them come in and generally gave us an explanation and we moved on. That seemed a little more black and white to me, that, someone voted twice and you come in, and then we get to this other stuff. So I guess those are my comments, and I think, Rob, did you have something you want to add?
Sure. Yeah, I think that in general there are two types of intent. And it is more determining intent, not necessarily determining sincerity, I guess, but it's more, we're all familiar as attorneys with determining intent. And there's two types of intent that I can think of. And this is not just a Republicans going over voting in the Democrat primary issue. In our recent past, we've seen it happen the other way. It's a broad issue that we have to deal with as a board. And there are people, Jeff, you mentioned, I even referenced before, the national talk show hosts encouraging people for that one type of intent, that, I think our candidate later on in the year is going to have an easier time beating candidate A, so I'm going to go over and vote for candidate A against candidate B, so we get a weaker candidate. The other type, which of primary voter crossing over, which I still think doesn't meet the necessary intent that's required to validly go over, but to me is a more genuine sincerity, and that's why we can't get into that, is a person who may be intent on staying a member of one party, they really have always been a member of one party, but there's really nothing to vote on in their party. And whether just to have something to vote on, or even to say, look, if one of these other people who's vying for the nomination over the other side, one of them's got to come forward. And lesser of evils, I'd rather be this one than that one. And so it's with more sincerity, not necessarily malice, but also with no intent on what the statute says to uphold the principles of that particular party they're going over to. Either one of those is potentially illegal type of intent under this law. I'm concerned in the broader sense of it, and I'm concerned about the unequal application among voters in this state. I'm most concerned about what our poll workers are doing. Not only what you talked about, and Joe, which is very egregious, but even to the extent that I would think, and perhaps our audit process or whatever type of auditing we're doing of this election and the paper records that we have from this election. Look, if I'm a poll worker, if I'm training our poll workers, I would want them to have the message that if the person signs that form, which form is it again? The Form 10X, and they sign it and then write on it, but not really, but I don't mean it. I mean, that there should be some, there should be some discretion that our poll workers then have to exercise. The way the law reads, that our poll workers, the judges of election, they have a duty in these cases. And I think they have a duty more so than just handing the piece of paper and then sticking it in the file for as long as the law reads this way. I agree with Chairman Hastings. I really am not desirous of seeing this board go down a road that leads to a chilling effect of people participating in the voting process. But I think since we're contemplating some sort of audit anyway, I think perhaps something that can at least, at a minimum, do two things. One is get to the materiality of this. You know, to what extent do we feel, you know, we're looking statistically, to what extent are we able to see that there was potentially improper voting, crossover voting going on? What is the scope of the problem? And the other is looking into any specific hints to begin gathering information that doesn't shut the door towards future action if we thought we're warned. Even one of the presidential campaigns was encouraging crossover voting, and in what a number of people have come to me with this, with a message that was somewhat confusing and misleading, and did not truly inform the voter that although as a member of one party you could go over and vote in the other one, that there was no indication to that potential voter that immediately then and effectively changed their voter registration, and that there was something they were unable to change back until the next part of the primary, or that there was anything they might have to be swearing to, and they actually would need to validly want to become a member of that party. So one of the, in addition to the national talk show, she had one of the national candidates actively promoting crossover voting without any regard to what Ohio law says about the person's ability to do that.
What I'd suggest, and I appreciate all the input from the board members, is that I'll be on the phone with the Secretary of State's office Wednesday, and we'll certainly discuss this, and I'll share with the board members her position. I would ask the staff to, if there's any actual information or complaints you have, to kind of gather that, get it together, and report back to us on the 31st, what, if any, information you have, and then we can decide more formally how to proceed.
Well, I would like the staff to review whatever documents we have that may indicate that there was this violation occurred.
Sure. I mean, does that include reading through all the 10X forms and pulling out every one of them?
It does.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?